Please briefly summarize your industry education and professional background prior to your new role at STI.
As far as my educational background, I started out at Cornell University. I studied there for both my bachelor's and my master's in civil and environmental engineering, where I had a focus on structural engineering and engineering management. And then from there, I went to a structural engineering firm in New York City, Robert Silman Associates. They're now a T.Y. Lin company. I worked there for 3 years on a variety of projects, all different construction materials, anything from public schools to high rises, and some renovation projects as well. And then in 2007, I started with Nucor. My first company with Nucor was Verco Decking. And there I was an engineer, a regional engineer. I was the liaison between Verco and the structural engineering community. And I also did some research and development work while I was there. And then from there, I moved to another Nucor company, Nucor Building Systems in Indiana. And there I was leading the team of engineers that were designing what are considered pre-engineered metal buildings. And I was there for several years. And then just last year in 2021, I moved over to Volcraft of New York, which is another Nucor company. They design and fabricate steel joists. So there I was managing our joist design projects in the Pennsylvania and New Jersey area, as well as leading a number of steering committees for the Volcraft Verco group. So I was leading a steering committee for business development, as well as advancement of technology. And then an additional steering committee that I led was between the Volcraft Verco group and Nucor Buildings group. That was a collaboration committee. So just the experiences that I've had in some business development and leading steering committees, and then my technical background led me to where I am with the Steel Tube Institute now.
Please describe what the Steel Tube Institute does, how it works, and the role it plays in the design and specification of buildings, structures, and geotechnical solutions.
So the Steel Tube Institute is an industry organization. Their vision is to be the nationally recognized authority on carbon tube steel, and their mission is to increase demand for steel tube by effective promotion, education, and problem solving, targeting all trades from engineers to architects to owners to field installers. And so there's a marketing component to it, a technical component to it, an educational component to it. And then as far as the role that it plays in design and specification of buildings, the Steel Tube Institute participates in the development of design specifications through their work with organizations like AISC, AISI. They also participate in AWS, ASTM, and more recently AASHTO and NSBA committees. We also create or develop technical materials to support the design community. We develop educational content, such as live presentations, webinars on demand to help support the design community.
Please tell me about your new role at STI as Institute Director HSS. How is that specific to HSS? And are there other Institute Directors at STI?
My role as the Institute Director of HSS, which is Hollow Structural Section within the Steel Tube Institute, is to work closely with our member companies to lead the organization's technical, educational, and marketing efforts to promote the use of HSS. I have responsibility for the strategy, implementation, and development of our technical, educational, and marketing missions. And then, the role also involves industry relations, working with those agencies that I mentioned previously, like AISC, AISI, et cetera. And then as far as the structure of the organization, there is one other director. So the organization is broken into 2 arms. There's the HSS arm, the HSS committee, and then there's the conduit committee. And so Dale Crawford is the director of the conduit committee, and he's also the executive director of the organization as a whole.
What are some common misconceptions about what organizations such as STI do for their industries?
I don't know if this is a misconception, but I think a big one for me is that some people don't realize what a great resource they have in industry organizations. I know as a young engineer, for instance, I didn't know about the valuable resources that industry organizations have available to the design community, like the Steel Deck Institute, the Steel Joist Institute, the Steel Tube Institute. There's just a plethora of resources available, technical resources on the engineering side. There's also environmental resources. There's also economy resources. So I think that's a big one for me. And then there's, sometimes this perception that we don't need trade organizations. And I would argue that we do, for the reasons that I stated previously. In addition to the resources that the organizations have available, they're also working with the code writers and the specification writers to ensure that, for instance, for the Steel Tube Institute, that those products are adequately represented when developing those codes and specifications. And then I think one other one that commonly happens with the Steel Tube Institute is some people think that we manufacture steel. That's a very common question that we get, and we don't. We don't manufacture steel as the institute itself, but we can help point you in the right direction, because our member companies do produce steel. And then one last one is that some people think that the materials that we publish might conflict with other organizations like the AISC, but we actually work hand in hand and partner with AISC. And so our materials don't conflict with those other organizations.
Please describe some areas where building designers and engineers lack sufficient knowledge of steel and other building materials to make the best design decisions. And how can they learn more so they're better prepared?
Two main areas where I think engineers lack sufficient knowledge is connection design and economy of HSS. And so as far as connection design, we have a number of resources available as the Steel Tube Institute. We have HSS Connects, which is a software available on our website. We have spreadsheet design tools. We also have webinars on connection design. And another great webinar that we have teaches how to utilize mainstream software to design HSS connections. So that's one area where there is information available. And I think just not everyone is aware of those resources. And then as far as economy, there's just a perception that HSS is more expensive than other options. And when you're comparing the cost per foot of an HSS member, that is true. It is more expensive than another steel member, for instance. But with HSS, you're getting a higher capacity for that member, and then your footprint of your member can also be smaller. So those things need to be taken into account as well. And so similarly, we have resources available on the economy of HSS. We have a webinar called Debunking the Myth of HSS Costs. And then we have an article, HSS Saving You Money. And then, as part of my strategy for 2023 and upcoming years, I'd like to expand on those resources that we have available for the economy of HSS.
What are some best practices and use cases for designing with steel and steel tube in particular? Tying
together the connections and the economy of steel that I just mentioned, engineers, when they specify HSS sizes, they don't always take into account the wall thickness that's required of the HSS in order to transfer the connection forces, because in half of the country, that connection design is the responsibility of the fabricator. So then the engineer is specifying HSS of a certain size, and once the project is down the road and the fabricator is designing connections, they discover that HSS size doesn't work for that connection because the wall thickness you won't be able to transfer the forces at the connection. And so then they need to increase the HSS sizes a little later in the game. And it gives this perception that connections are difficult, and that once again, HSS is more expensive than other options. But if those things were taken into account when specifying the size of the HSS, I think that would change that perception. So again, we have some tools available to help with that. We have HSS Connects, which is a very easy to use tool and can help you determine what thickness of member you need without necessarily having to go through the whole connection design. But that can help specify the right HSS sizes from the very beginning. So that's one best practice. Another one would be to use 50 KSI steel. ASTM A500 grade C increased to 50 KSI for all shapes in 2021. So previously rounds were 42 KSI and rectangles and squares were 46 KSI. But now the material being supplied by the manufacturers is 50 KSI. So it would be best to just go ahead and use that 50 KSI in design and take full advantage of that strength. And then as far as usage of HSS, we see HSS specified a lot for architecturally exposed situations. It has clean lines, but that's not the only case that it can be used. It's also great for long span trusses, for stadiums, if you have conference spaces, theaters where you need those long spans. HSS is a great use there as well. And then it's also very often used in big box retail because you have a smaller footprint. Same thing with warehouses. So your columns will have a smaller footprint. You get more usable space in that retail space or that warehouse space.
What are your goals as the new director for HSS, short and long term? How do you see yourself changing or improving the organization?
As far as short-term goals, so you might have picked up that my experience, while it's been in steel for the last 15 years with Nucor, my experience has been in steel decking, pre-engineered metal buildings, joist design. So I'm actually new to the HSS world. So my short-term goals are really to learn as much as I can about the HSS industry and learn from all of our partners, the other industry organizations, structural engineers, architects, general contractors, our member companies. So those are my short-term goals, is really to learn as much as I can and to really find out where our gaps are and where we can best serve the industry. And then some of the things that I've picked up already and that will come into play as part of my long-term goals is focusing on expanding our reach to architects, fabricators, general contractors. Right now, in recent years, we've done a great job reaching out to engineers. A lot of our content is focused for engineers, and that's been awesome. And I just want to expand that to the architectural community, general contractors, and fabricators as well. And then I'd also like to expand our resources as far as cost comparisons. That's a commonly asked question, and I think it's a gap that we have, just comparing HSS to other materials, within the steel industry and outside of the steel industry, to better inform the design community so they can make the best decisions for their project. And then just learning where we have gaps in our technical resources and research, and work on expanding that to best serve the engineering community. And then, of course, I'd like to, long-term, my vision would be to increase the market share of HSS in the construction market. One of the main things is that there's just a ton of resources available. And also, I think something that I didn't mention is within industry organizations and the Steel Tube Institute as well, there are experts that you can refer to. And we can help put you in touch with those experts if we aren't able to answer your questions ourselves. So I would just encourage the design community to reach out to the Steel Tube Institute when they're considering HSS. If they have any concerns or questions, come to us first, and we'll help, problem solve and answer your questions.